Thanks to all of you all for being out here this evening. They didn't pass the mic around to me, but I just have to say that all those reports of the weather were, they weren't just greatly exaggerated, they were completely wrong. The weather was so nice down in Pueblo. It was sunny. We got sunburns out there. It was calm. There were one or two clouds in the skies, but we could see practically down to New Mexico. And we saw 98 species of birds, but that's our preliminary count, and we may be able to massage the list up to 105, so we're breathing down your neck there. All righty. Well, again, thanks very much to all of you all for coming out here this evening. I'm going to be talking tonight about technology, contemporary technology, and about the ways that technology is affecting how we engage and understand and appreciate the world around us. So this is going to be a talk that really focuses on the current time and even sort of attempts to look into the future. But before we do any of that, before we look at current trends in birding and nature study, before we gaze into our crystal ball and consider the future, I actually hope that you'll indulge me for a little bit of a historical reflection. I think we need to consider a little bit of history before we look at the present time and, as I said, maybe even ponder the future. So I'm going to ask you all now to kind of play along with me for a little thought experiment. I want us to turn the clock all the way back to the turn of the 20th century. Not the 21st century, the one we just had, but the turn of the 20th century, the years leading up to the 20th century, somewhere maybe around 1890, so 125 years ago, before I was born, I think before any of you all walked this earth. So we're going to put ourselves in the year 1890. It was a time that I've only read about in the history books. I don't know anybody who was born as long ago as 1890. It was a time that was full of diverse and sometimes sort of conflicting and contradictory currents of thought in the United States and Europe and elsewhere. But there's one particular current of thought from around the year 1890 that really grabs at me, and that's the one I want us to focus on right now. And this was the idea, and by the way, I'm not speaking on behalf of everybody who was alive in 1890. You can find an exception to what I'm about to say. But there was one idea out there that was quite pervasive, quite dominant, and this was the idea that everything was going to be sort of calm and quiet in the 20th century to come. The idea was that the 19th century, the 18th century, the 17th century had been exciting and tumultuous, and everything had been sort of figured out, and a period of calm and quiescence was going to settle upon the earth. You certainly see this in the sciences. Some of the most famous scientists of the day, people like Kelvin and Michelson, are said to have quipped that the only remaining scientific discoveries to be made were fiddling with the sixth digit after the decimal point of certain physical constants. No more science was there to be discovered. You read about this in the political and sort of current affairs and cultural thinking of the day. The idea was that ever since the Enlightenment, all of the great ideals of liberal democracy had pretty much been established in the United States and Europe, and that led to some sort of strange neurotic contortions about the supposed virtues of imperialism. But basically, everybody, or many people at that time, thought that the world was about to embark on a period of just relative political calm. The idea of utopia, which we sort of snigger at today, was actually a very respectable idea in the year 1890. When I think of utopia, I also think of religion. I don't talk about religion too much in birding audiences, and I'll be sort of veiled here, but I just want to say that even in religion, in Europe and especially in the United States, there was this idea, it's a doctrine, sort of a funny word we don't think of anymore, of post-millennialism, the idea that this long period of peace and prosperity was going to fall upon the earth, and then eventually Jesus would come back, and that would be that. So in the year 1890, whether you were in the sciences or whether you were in politics and current affairs, whether you were into religion, you thought that things were going to be calm and sedate, that there was going to be this quiescent period for the indefinite future. And then the 20th century happened and everything was proven wrong. In the earliest years of the 20th century, you have Albert Einstein and relativity, and then quantum mechanics and the expanding universe and genetics and molecular biology. The 20th century was inarguably the most exciting time for scientific innovation and revolution in all of the human Western, at least the human experience in the West and probably anywhere on Earth. And in politics, you right away have the First World War and then the Second World War, and all of the upheaval and tumult all across the world in the 1950s and the 1960s. And well, as to religion, that post-millennial view has disappeared. There have also been many wonderful things in the 20th century, great advances in medicine and public health. The 20th century was anything but quiescent, anything but calm. The people in 1890 were totally wrong. All right. That brings me now 100 years into the future relative to 1890, to the year 1990. So we're moving ahead pretty quickly here. I want to share with you a real-life episode. It's personal to me. It involves me. Something that happened in the year 1990. In the year 1990, I remember vividly a conversation, really sort of a debate, a discussion that I had with my grandmother. My grandmother was a child of the 20th century. She was born in the earliest years of the 20th century. She lived all the way till 1998. She lived and breathed and eventually died the 20th century. I was a young man at the time, and I remember lamenting to her that her life had been so exciting. She saw everything that was so exciting. She got to see cars and planes and eventually space travel. She saw the terror of World War I, the horrors of World War II, genocide, atomic warfare, all those good things I talked about, advances in science. And it sort of culminated, it seemed to me, with the year 1969 and man landing on the moon. And that just seemed so exciting to me. And I asked her to tell me the story. What was it like to be there? Well, she wasn't on the moon, but she saw it on television when people landed on the moon. And she put it so memorably. She said that even though the year 1969 was so tumultuous, for that moment, all of humanity was brought together. Whether you were Soviet or American, Arab or Israeli, whatever you were in 1969, humanity just stopped and caught its breath while that thing landed on the moon and the guy got out and took his giant step or his little leap. We were all united in that moment. And then nothing happened. I was just barely 1 year old in 1969, so I have no memory of 1969, and it seems so unfair to me that my grandmother saw all of this exciting stuff, and growing up in the 70s and 80s, history had come to a time still. History had come to an end, as far as I was concerned. Think about what happened to me in the 70s and the 80s. The only events of significance that I could come up with were the invention of the 8-track player, disco, Tab Cola, bell-bottom pants, and MTV. It wasn't fair. She'd seen everything and I'd seen nothing. And it just seemed like nothing was going to happen for the rest of my life. And I remember that little smirk on her face and those blue eyes with the twinkle, you know, just sit back and relax. Something may actually happen in the years and decades to come. Which brings me finally to the matter of my presentation this evening about birds and nature study in the digital age. So I'm going to be shifting gears now, no more history lessons, but keep in mind some of the reflections I've just shared. I hope they set the stage for what we're about to talk about. If everything is set up properly here, we're going to see an image here, from Birding Magazine in the year 1981. That's an important year in my own life. It's really the first year in which I was seriously a bird watcher. I got into it, I sort of dabbled in 1980 when I was just turned 12, but by the time I was 13 in 1981, I was a full-on, full-fledged, never-turned-back bird watcher. I don't recall actually this image when it came out, but this is an iconic image that I certainly knew about just a few years after this image was published. I think you can sort of understand what's going on here. The basic idea is that we have the past, let's say sometime back in the benighted 1950s there, that poor guy with his stick, and then the modern contemporary birder there in 1981, and then some guy off in the future. Well, I suspect that the transition from, let's say, 1950 to 1981 is more or less accurate there. But my chief thesis, really my only thesis for this evening, is that the transition that's depicted from, let's say, 1981 to 2015 is not nearly as dramatic as what has happened. All those gadgets that that guy has with him there, we routinely use them in the field today. But instead of, carrying around those great big things, they're tiny, they're smaller than this. We're doing all of the stuff that that guy is doing and lots more stuff, but not dressed up the way he's dressed up. There is one thing, by the way, in this image that's very accurate and really eerie, and has to do with facial hair on young men. I mean, really, they were clean cut in the 50s, and they all had those, remember those mustaches in the 80s? And today, if you're 20 or 30, you have a beard. So they got that right, but I'm going to say that they got everything else more or less wrong on this image. And again, my idea, the one that I'm going to explore for the rest of the evening, is that far more has happened than they ever anticipated. The way I created this image was with my telephone. I had a copy of this lying around the house. I took a picture with my telephone, downloaded it to my computer, and uploaded it to this PowerPoint presentation. I see some heads nodding. That's pretty normal stuff. But suppose I had told you in 1981 that I took a picture with my telephone. They would consign me to the loony bin. You didn't take pictures with telephones in the year 1981. The only people who could do things like that with their telephone were depicted in the science fiction fair, reruns actually by the 1980s from the day. This is actually, although we're laughing at it, a sort of important and serious image here. I think many of you, well, okay, some of you all may know, maybe the rest of you all don't know, that the inspiration for what we today call the mobile phone or the cell phone came from Star Trek. The scientist at Motorola, who pretty much invented the cell phone, thought it would be cool if we could sort of walk around like Captain Kirk with his communicator there and not be confined to that black thing on the desk by the bathroom or the sink that you, remember those rotary dial things? If you could actually walk around with it. So classic example here of life imitating art or science fiction. It's also ironic to me that we look at this image and it's so hopelessly quaint and outdated. Captain Kirk is using a flip phone. Now come on, if any of y'all use a flip phone, show me your 8-track player while you're at it. Nobody uses flip phones anymore. That is so 2009. No, everybody today uses smartphones. We all use smartphones. Some of us are connected in various ways to our smartphones. And I actually want to reflect just a little bit now about smartphones and where we've come with smartphones. My kids use smartphones, and when they have questions that I can't satisfactorily answer, they ask Siri, and she gives them an answer. And my kids have conversations with Siri all the time. And Siri knows everything. And I want you to think about that for just a moment. I'm going to share with you a really eerie comment. I'm going to try to paraphrase it here from the great science writer, the contemporary science writer, Brian Greene, about a thought he had in 1970 when he was about 10 years old watching Star Trek. It wasn't reruns then, I think it was the real deal. When he was 10 years old watching Star Trek, he was so gullible and so suggestible that he could believe everything in Star Trek. Transporting whales from planet to planet, aliens everywhere that speak the English language, spaceships that go faster than the speed of light. That was all plausible to him. But the one thing he could not bring himself to believe in was a computer that has the answer to everything. Remember in Star Trek, or even if you don't, I'll tell you, they would ask the computer a question, what's the cube root of 8, or when was the War of 1812 fought? And for a long time, the computer would think some more and then say 1812, the War of 1812, or 2 for the cube root of 8. I guess there's some imaginary roots too. But anyhow, 2 is the real root of the cube root of 8. And we routinely do that now with Google. You can Google anything and get an answer, and actually a lot faster and a lot more accurately than the computer on Star Trek. We've achieved that. The computer that knows everything. And kids and some adults routinely talk to Siri. Do some of you all know who the great computer scientist Alan Turing was? Yeah. So you may know about the Turing Test then. And Alan Turing, who was a very visionary thinker, he also was one of the most important scientists of the 20th century. His star is rising. We'll soon recognize him. I think he's one of the greatest scientists of all time. But he was fascinated by this question of machine intelligence. And he came up with this thought experiment, an idea called the Turing Test. And the basic idea is if you can communicate with a computer, whether it's by typing or by talking or Bluetooth or what have you, in such a manner as to more or less replicate or simulate a human conversation, then that computer not only is intelligent, but that computer has a consciousness. That computer is a thinking, sentient being. I'm not sure if we're there yet with Siri. We're very, very close. And nobody, as far as I know, in the AI business and artificial intelligence thinks that we're not going to get there. We're going to very soon be at the point where computers not only are as smart as we are, but they're actually as sentient as we are. They feel as we do. They think as we do. They are conscious beings just as we are. All right. Take all of that stuff in now as I now finally get around to the question of what it is that all this technology is doing to us. I hope I've sort of persuaded you that at least that I believe that a lot of pretty exciting change has happened in the past 25 years. We talk to our telephones and our telephones talk back to us. And if you saw people talking to their telephones and expecting the telephones to talk back to them in the year 1981 or 1990 or even 2000, you'd be sent away. But we do that routinely now. All right, now we're going to look at what telephones do with birding and with nature study. I'm going to share with you the events of a special day for me less than a month ago. It was the occasion of my 47th birthday. It was Sunday, April 12th. My wife was out of the country, and my kids decided that they would go bird watching with me first thing in the morning. We were actually out on the trail at Rabbit Mountain in northern Boulder County before 6 a.m. I have a question. How often do you get an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old out on the trail before 6 a.m. on a cold, raw day in April? The answer is not very often unless they're out there with their gadgets, with their gizmos, which they were. My son was out there, and he right away asked me what this was. He found this beetle, snagged the phone, took a picture of it, and made a video of it. And Eric, keep your mouth shut. All right. Again, he did this with a telephone. Here's a close-up of this beetle. I was certain that it was a beetle. I had an idea as to what it was. I think it was a beetle I'd never seen before. So I ran to the book to see what to do. Now, Eric, just if you disagree with me, just wait, all right? Because I just want to say something about this book. This is my own interpretation here. I love this book. This is the book I consult more than any other book. I confess I read this book more than any bird book. But this is the book. This is a book that could not have existed, in my opinion, 20 or 25 years ago, for two reasons. The first is because of the technology that went into the production of this book, the sort of digitally manipulated, digitally enhanced, just digital photos, really good images of insects. That's easy to say, and I think like the preface even says that. But what's cooler about this book is the educational, the pedagogical philosophy of this book, which did not exist in the 1980s or 1990s. I learned insects in grad school in the 1990s with keys and manuals, and I worked in a museum, and I learned about tarsal segments and counting up hairs and looking through microscopes and this and that and the other. And I'm not in any way denigrating that approach to the study of insects. I have no problem with that at all. But the idea that you could just go out into the field, you don't even need binoculars or a telescope or even a camera or anything, and just see an insect and put a name to it, that idea really hadn't even come at that point. So this book is one that is, in my opinion, really reflective not only of modern technologies, but also of a modern way of thinking. And I should say not only reflective of, but I think has helped to advance that type of thinking. So my guess, based on what this book said, was that we had ourselves a carrion beetle in the family Sylphidae, in particular in the genus Microphorus, one of the burying beetles. But I wasn't sure of it, so I posted the image, in fact, the video, to Facebook. And right away, I got comments from a bunch of people, including Ben Coulter, who's a brilliant young evolutionary biologist, I think at the University of Chicago, a real expert on burying beetles. And just, I don't know if you can see down here, but he said, without additional photos or better detail, I'd go with Nigrophorus hybridus or Nigrophorus investigator. You may be interested in the key here. That link there is to at the very least, obscure reference. The sort of thing that in 1990 you would have gone to a major university library to track down or maybe found via interlibrary loan. Today you click and you find the entire text of the carrion beetles of Nebraska. I don't mean just the cover, the whole book. It's all there. And this was Nigrophorus investigator, if anybody's curious. That is something that could not have been imagined 25 years ago. We went to libraries 25 years ago. We read books 25 years ago, 15 years ago. Today, it's all on the internet, and that's just really cool to me. Well, this beetle, this Nigrophorus burying beetle, was one that is actually fairly widely known, and any entomologist worth his salt could tell you what it was. But sometimes I really get stymied by beetles. Here's another one that Andrew and I found just a week before that episode. Looks like Eric Eaton to the rescue. And by the way, Eric, I did not know you were going to be here when I created this talk, so this is both kind of cool and sort of disarming to me as well. But I had this thing in the wrong family, I think, but he pointed out to me that it's Elia americana, I think. And look at the bottom there, if you can see down that low. There's currently no Colorado record and few other images. Well, that's really cool. You know, just some bloke with a camera who had no idea what actually, it was my son with the camera, had no idea what he was doing, neither did I. We find this thing, and it's a new Bug Guide Colorado record of Elia americana. You can actually advance science with Facebook and a telephone. All right, I've talked a little bit about me and my kids, but I haven't yet mentioned my wife. That's not my wife. However, I mentioned on April 12th she was out of the country. She was in Africa, in Zambia, studying elephants, and she, they're about 8 hours ahead of us, so it was 6 in the morning in Colorado. I guess that makes it 2 in the afternoon in Africa, and she sent us birthday greetings in front of this rather imposing African elephant. She took the picture with her telephone. She emailed it from Zambia, where they have, in fact, good satellite connections, and you can get the elephant out by telephone to people in Colorado. In the old days, I don't know, what do we do, send letters or something like that? Or you wait till the spouse gets back to the hotel room and hope to get and the phone calls were expensive too, remember that? It cost a lot of money to make long distance phone calls from Africa to Colorado. But anyhow, a birthday greeting conveyed by telephone, but not the old fashioned way, said by means of an image of a distressingly close African elephant. All right. When I was thinking about this talk, I asked Risa if I could talk not just about birds, but also about nature study, and she deliberated with the committee, and they said that'd be fine. You can talk about other aspects of nature than birds. And you may have noticed I haven't talked about birds at all yet, but that's about to change. This is a bird. Did anybody see one of these today, by the way? I guess not. This is a black phoebe. And earlier in April, I was just birding and happened to see a black phoebe in Boulder County, Colorado. It's a rare bird in Boulder County. Boulder County birders, who are a bit like Pueblo County birders and probably birders everywhere, want to know about a black phoebe. So what do you do when you find a rare bird? Well, in the old days, you would go find a telephone and call people up and let them know about the rare bird. And also, you would perhaps record somehow that you had detected or seen or heard this rare bird. In the old days, we did it with objects called a pen and notebook. For those of the younger people over there may not know about this, but this is how we kept records in the old days. And this is really not all that old a record here at all. It looks like it's February 8th, 2004, so just about 10, 11 years ago. That was before the eBird revolution. Today, nobody keeps notes. I can barely write. And, pads of paper, I don't know, in a box somewhere in my mother's proverbial or literal basement. No, today everything goes on to eBird. So here's a record of the birds I saw that morning, a black phoebe, eastern phoebe, sage phoebe, some other birds as well. Well, people want to know about this black phoebe. So right away, the sighting of the black phoebe, it's the 5th bird down there, lights up bird tracks, which is this way of getting information to all of the birders out there who might have eBird rare bird alerts so they can know about black phoebes. But where is that black phoebe? Well, you ask, you receive. It's at the location of that orange stick pin. I mean, that's like the exact spot in Boulder Creek where that black phoebe is. So they go and they find the bird, and as you can see, all sorts of people went to see that black phoebe in Boulder County. Now that's only one black phoebe. There are a lot of black phoebes in the world. In the old days when we saw a black phoebe, we made note of it and we put it on a piece of paper, which we wrote on with a pen. And then, honestly, it kind of stayed with us. Nothing happened to that black phoebe report. We collected it sort of the way we collect baseball cards, if kids still do. Pokemon cards, I guess that's it today, isn't it? Maybe that's passe, I don't know. Whatever kids collect these days. I should know these things, but I don't. Anyhow, that black phoebe record in the old days would just have sort of stayed there. But today, all of our sightings are linked with everybody else's sightings of black phoebes or any other bird all over the world. We looked at one black phoebe in Boulder County, but how about all the black phoebes on Earth? These are all of the sightings of black phoebes everywhere on planet Earth as submitted to this eBird database that relates and compiles and analyzes and does things to all of the black phoebe sightings in North America. So these are just the sightings of black phoebes by ordinary bird watchers all over the Americas, and you can see some really cool trends in here. You can see, for example, by the heavier shade of purple, that black phoebes are especially common on the Pacific slope of California, also the Sierra Madre of Mexico, and the pattern in South America is especially fascinating and not yet represented in the field guides, although they're all changing because they're all based on eBird data now. You can see in northern South America how the black phoebe is basically a bird of the Pacific slope, and then in southern South America it goes over to the east side, the Atlantic slope of the Rockies, the Andes, down in Peru and Bolivia and down into Argentina. So this is the sort of information that's coming out from eBird with regard to black phoebe and all of the other 10,000 species of birds on Earth. It starts with a personal sighting, just as it always did, and it very quickly becomes part of a global database that is increasingly being used by conservation biologists, pure scientists, policymakers, you name it. All right. From black phoebes, let us now proceed to the world's largest bush tit. Now, this is not the world's greatest photo of a bush tit, but it's sort of an unusual photo of a bush tit. I took it with my telephone, and if you look closely here, you can see that bush tit's mouth is open. It's actually vocalizing here. For those of you who know bush tits, in fact, for example, those of you who are on my field trip this morning, you know that they never sit still. Bush tits are like, protons on the sun just going everywhere. They just move constantly. But this bush tit sat still long enough for me to notice that it was sitting still, then go into the house, find my phone, which somebody had moved, and then find my scope, which somebody had moved, brought my scope out and my phone out, set them up on this bush tit that was still vocalizing there right in place. It was just on this one perch, teed up, giving the same vocalization over and over and over again. If all goes well, we're going to hear this bush tit singing right now. All right. Okay, so that is the actual vocalization of that bush tit we just heard there. So I took a picture with my telephone, recorded it with a tiny little pocket recorder that's back over under Alan Burns' feet right now, and obtained audio and visual documentation of this bush tit. In addition to looking at the bush tit, we can actually look at a more sort of technical or conceptual representation of the bird's song. This is just a graph here of time on the horizontal axis, and then the axis, and then basically, I'm being a little untechnical here, but sort of the loudness, the amplitude of the call on the vertical axis. And again, if this animation works well, you can follow the red line and watch this and listen to this bush tit singing. All right, now, I did that. I made that animation we just saw. And you have to relate to something here. I'm a complete technical incompetent. I can't do anything technical. You know, sometimes when a car breaks down on the side of the road, and especially if somebody carries a Y chromosome, they get out and open up the trunk and pretend to know what they're doing and move some things around. I don't even make any pretenses. I don't get out of the car. I just call AAA and ask for help. I can't do anything technical. It's really cool that I can do something like this. All of this is just freeware available online. The gadget that I use is inexpensive. The software that I use is free. The hardware that I use is really easy to use. And this animation here that shows us how the Bushtit sings in time and according to how loud it is something that, you know, a complete incompetent like myself is perfectly capable of doing. Okay, so I've recorded this Bushtit, but now what? Well, I take it to the next level, just as I did with that Black Phoebe. I put it online. This is an upload of that Bushtit vocalization. This is actually the same Bushtit up there. It's represented a different way. That's the frequency of the bird song as opposed to the loudness. And what we can see down here is the location of the bird in Boulder County, Colorado. And if you look at where that red dot is relative to the purple, it occurs outside the supposed range of the Bushtit. Now that map's just a little bit out of date. Bushtits are rapidly expanding north into the northern Front Range metro region of Colorado. They're actually up to Cheyenne. I think they're going to be over in Nebraska very soon. If you want Nebraska ornithological fame and glory, go hang out right here and try to find the very first Bushtit to show up in Nebraska. I think it's going to happen like this spring. They are on the move. This website here called Xenocanto, or xenocanto.org, is one of the many brilliant innovations coming out of the really just flourishing birding and natural history community in Holland. And I just still can't get over the fact that I can go out there, record this song, upload it to a website in Holland, and within minutes, you know, folks in China or India or Chile or somewhere are talking to me about this Bushtit in in Colorado. I recorded some calls in Pennsylvania a little while ago, thinking about Colorado. Alrighty, so I want to actually put a chronological perspective on things right now. This happened on a Friday morning. Actually, we can probably get the date, can't we? Help me out here. It was Friday, March 6th at 8:34 in the morning, if you're curious. And I really got to thinking about what the heck this Bushtit was doing. It was just sitting in place there, singing that song, and although you probably couldn't hear it in the audio, it's quite faint, there was another bird way across the street in another yard producing the exact same vocalization. So I hypothesized that this Bushtit was singing. Well, according to the literature, Bushtits, along with cedar waxwings, don't sing. They're songbirds without a song. I'm not so sure about that. In fact, I posed a question, do Bushtits sing, to a blog, Nathan Peeplo's. He's, I think many of you all know, one of the foremost experts on bird vocalizations. And I put this up on, looks like it was posted on March 9th, so that was the next Monday. And very soon thereafter, on March 10th, 17 comments came in about the song of the Bushtit, including, you can't scroll all the way down here, but comments from some of the world's experts on bird vocalizations and Bushtit biology. Susan Sloan and others contributed in this forum. So check out what happened. I heard this bird on Friday. I had an insight on Friday afternoon. I kind of thought about it and communicated with Nathan Peeplo on Saturday and Sunday. He published the article on Monday, and people were talking about it on Tuesday. That's what, 2 working days, 5 parts of 5 whole days, going from observation to hypothesis to publication to discussion. Now, are there any university professors in the audience here? I need to be careful about what I'm saying, but the whole way that knowledge is being produced has been turned upside down by the internet. In the old days, it would have taken a year or more to go from the discovery to the writing it up to the peer review process to getting it out there to having discussion at meetings and so forth. It happens in a matter of days right now. We are accumulating knowledge more quickly than we ever did before, and by the time March 9th or March 10th rolled along, I was done with Bushtits and ready to move on to something else. I know some of you all know that I'm kind of into these collared doves in the genus Streptopelia. So some of you know what's coming next. But this is in fact not a... It sure looks like one, But what if we look at the rest of the bird? These guys and gals are all over my neighborhood in Lafayette and eastern Boulder County. They occur north at least to Casper, Wyoming. I know that Ronnie Morgan, others have seen them down here in Colorado Springs. There's some reports in Pueblo. This is not a Eurasian collared dove. The undertail coverts are the same white as the rectrices, the tail feathers, and the outermost rectrix is white, not black on this bird. This is in fact an African collared dove. They're here, they're expanding, they're breeding. Certain elements in the Colorado birding community have problems wrapping their brains around this reality, but they're there. They're in eBird. Eventually the Colorado Bird Records Committee will get around to putting this bird on the list. It'll probably be number 500. I think it'll make it before Vox's Swift does. Anyhow, your African collared doves are all over Colorado, and if you don't get a chance to look at the bird's underparts, you can listen to them. They are completely different from Eurasian collared doves. You all know Eurasian collared dove. Cuckoo, cup, cuckoo, cup, cuckoo, cup. This guy sings a hip, hipperoo, hip, hipperoo, and if you don't believe me, listen. This is this bird. You hear a collared dove in the background. All righty, there is our African collared dove. Widespread in eastern Boulder County, occurring at least, as I said, north to Casper, and south apparently to Pueblo, and probably down in Walsenburg, because there are a lot of collared doves in Walsenburg. All righty, we have looked now, if I'm doing the math right, at 3 different kinds of birds. We've looked at, help me out here, black phoebe, bushtit, and African collared dove. What do those 3 birds have in common? Well, they're all birds that, that too. They're all birds that we have explored by means of contemporary technologies available to the masses. But what if we turn that question upside down? What sorts of birds are the ones that we might be thinking about and paying attention to as we try to achieve insights about bird ecology, distribution, abundance, conservation, and so forth in the years to come? Well, one such bird is this guy, a black-chinned hummingbird that was in the park just down the street from my house. The thing about black-chinned hummingbirds, along with the birds we just looked at, African collared doves and bushtit, and to some extent black phoebe, is that it's what I like to think of as sort of a stealth bird. It's a bird that's on the move. It's rapidly expanding northward. It breeds now to Cheyenne. It's a common breeder in the Front Range metro region north of Denver. And a lot of people don't know about it because it's hard to detect. They're not in your face with that bright rosy red gorget of the broad-tailed hummingbird, and then they don't go all day long the way that the broad-tailed hummingbirds do. They're sort of sedate and calm, and they're easily overlooked as they just sort of go about their business in suburban gardens and also urban gardens all over the Front Range metro region. But birds like this, these stealth birds, birds that are on the move, birds that are doing things, literally going places, I think are ones that are really worth looking for. Lots of birds' ranges are changing right now. Be aware of the birds whose ranges are changing. Birds like black-chinned hummingbird. I think a lot of insights can come from birds like the black-chinned hummingbird. Also, and this is sort of circular because I've been talking about technology all along here, be aware of the sorts of birds that can be best appreciated with technology. Now, this bird is a northern rough-winged swallow. Well, I've known what this bird is for as long as I've been a birder. I would look at this bird and just say that's a northern rough-winged swallow. Does anybody other than John Drummond know what sex this rough-winged swallow is? Does anybody have any idea how to tell what sex this rough-winged swallow is? Not how it feels, okay? Does anybody know why the rough-winged swallow got its name? Okay, so we have somebody there. Well, let's zoom in literally here and take a look at the outer web of the outermost rectrix, which has straight as opposed to hooked barbules, making this a female northern rough-winged swallow. You cannot see this in the field. I don't care how good your eyes are. I don't see Mark Peterson, but even Mark Peterson can't sex rough-winged swallows in the field. It's impossible. And you can't do it with binoculars, and you can't really do it through a telescope, and you can do it with a really, really inexpensive, easy-to-use camera that even I have sort of figured out how to use. In particular, I'm using a camera, the SX50 here, that I think is going to be the next major thing in bird watching. 10 or 12 years ago, I would deal with the photographers who would grumble when they were hearing that film was going to be supplanted by digital. That'll never happen. Here's the next wave. That long lens you spent a lot of money on, it wasn't necessary. The Canon SX50, which a bunch of people are using right now, produces extraordinary images at a fraction of the cost. Canon came out with an SX60 that apparently is a bit of a flop. This XX70 that they're going to be bringing out later this year is going to be the one that is going to cause all of those $15,000 long lenses to be put up on eBay. That's, I think, the next big revolution out there. We got rid of film. We're going to be getting rid of those big old cameras very, very soon. Okay, look for stealth birds. Use technology and listen to what the kids are saying. Listen to what the kids are saying. All right, well, 2 days ago, my daughter asked me a kind of weird question. She said, "What's up with all these white robins in our neighborhood?" And I've noticed there are some whitish, or we say leucistic robins around Lafayette. And I don't really pay attention to leucistic robins. I have other things to do, like, ponder sexing of rough-winged swallows, or range expansions in the black-chinned hummingbird, or my love affair with African collared doves. And she said, well, my response was, oh, it's not worth it. Go play on the freeway. I was actually kind of dismissive of her. And she said, well, I'm just kind of curious. What would happen if they started mating with each other? And I gave this glib response. Well, they tend not to. These whitish robins are selected against. Nobody wants to mate with them. And then my son showed me this picture from just 2 days ago of a white robin nesting in the next door neighbor's gutter. That's a robin, actually. It doesn't look like a robin. It looks more like an island thrush or something like that. But this bird is definitely on a nest, and I assume there are eggs down there, and we're going to go out in the next couple of days and see if next couple of weeks, and see if this bird fledges white robins. I really had never thought about that before, and I don't mean to say that this is some overwhelmingly significant biological observation, but I would not have thought about these white robins if it hadn't been for, I won't call them the insights, but at least the ponderings of 2 little kids. All right, so we've looked at 3 things now to look at as we consider cool birds to think about in the years to come. Stealth birds, technology, and pay attention to the kids. I'm going to start to wind up now by actually dwelling a bit more on the matter of children and nature and technology. This is a book, Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv, that I think many of you all have heard of. I'm going to guess many of you all have heard of it, and not so many of you all have read it. This is one of these books like Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time, and also the U.S. Constitution and the Bible come to mind. Things that people say they know a lot about, but they actually haven't read. This book's thesis is grossly misrepresented out there. I'm very ambivalent about this book. I don't have a problem with the book itself, but I have a problem with the way people are misinterpreting what this book says. If you get into, who's honestly read this book? All right, cool. Well, as you know, this guy talks about hunting and fishing and throwing rocks in lakes and, kind of having a reckless childhood, actually. He encourages parents to let their kids just go out and do things. It's not all about, life in the boulder bubble, which is the way this book is often portrayed. We have to let our children be these sort of, combinations of Tarzan and like some fairy pixie thing, naked in the woods, prancing along and just communing with nature and only eating granola and, organic water and, never getting outside Boulder. That's not what this book is about, but it's how it's being received. A lot of the criticism, the favorable criticism of this book is for its message, which it doesn't present in any way, that our children are supposed to be, again, these sort of almost like fairy children out there living these perfect kind of Garden of Eden sorts of existences. That's not the way it is according to this book. All that Richard Louv is saying is get out there, with your kids or let them go out by themselves. He'd be totally fine with those Chicago parents who got like arrested for letting their 10-year-old walk home. No problem. That's the whole point, according to Richard Love. He said, just let the kids go outside and engage nature on their own terms. But a lot of people aren't receiving this book this way. Instead, they think that children ought to be like this guy on the right here. Anybody know who that is on the right? Tony Luckering. That's good, but close but no cigar. That's actually the young Ken Kaufman at the age of 17 there. And this image is also, I think, misreceived, misprocessed in the same way that Last Child in the Woods is. We look at this image, and I've seen people sort of smile in this very, I don't know, idyllic way about, Kaufman. He's probably barefoot. You can't quite see, but he's probably barefoot there. And he's just this pixie dust, Tarzan sort of thing out there in the grass with Roger Tory Peterson, by the way. And that's not the case. This image from 1973 is of somebody who even today, however many years later that is, 42 years later, is always 2 or 3 steps ahead of everybody else. Kaufman has been a visionary from his earliest years. Today in 2015, his mind is on 2025. He's always thinking ahead. This image, which again has been presented as this sort of American pastoral, the bucolic Ken Kaufman in his sneakers or maybe no shoes at all, is not accurate. That is a visionary, futurist, forward-thinking, always 2 steps ahead of the game individual there depicted on the right. Let's take this iconic image and move it up to the year 1998 to 2 of my heroes. And I'm sorry, Alan, but that is the real Bill Evans as far as I'm concerned on the left over there. Apparently there's a musician named Bill Evans, but that's Bill Evans, the ornithologist over there with Michael O'Brien. They have gadgets, they have technology. That's bad. I'm joking. Of course, I don't believe that at all. These two are really sort of birding and natural history and ornithological heroes of mine. They pioneered the study of nocturnal flight calls by recording birds. They're shown here at daybreak at Cape May. The birds finishing their nighttime flights. They're recording them as they go over. They can see the birds and they're figuring out the flight calls of all of these birds. That image from 1998 is getting kind of dated now. That's what, I don't know, 17 years ago. Let's just bring this all the way up to now just 10 months ago. And what we see here on the left is Reese Burke and on the right Hannah Floyd, and they're recording the flight calls of swallows. They're using equipment that is just as sophisticated, those big long poles that Bill and Michael were using, but they're about this size, and they're not looking at nocturnal flight calls. That's so, that's so yesterday. No, they're looking at the flight calls of swallows. And the flight calls of swallows is a matter for an entirely different talk. I don't know if you guys bring me back next year, we'll talk about the flight calls of swallows. But suffice it to say that work on the flight calls of swallows can provide really important indication of range changes and possibly how range changes are interacting with climate changes. So they don't really know that. I just had them out there recording swallows for me. But this really is cutting-edge work by 2 little girls who I think actually are barefoot in this particular image here, but they're very much using technology, and I don't think they would be out there if it weren't for technology. So here we see 3 generations of birders, I guess 4 if you include Roger Tory Peterson, because he's quite a bit older than Ken Kaufman, and I submit that they're all doing the exact same thing. 1973, 1998, 2014, I think that this engagement of the universe around us has always been achieved by people who are willing to use the technology of the day. We went from those old binoculars and cameras to those big fuzzy sticks to these little micro devices here. Certainly the type of knowledge that we're acquiring, the type of technology that we're acquiring is very different. But that impulse to appreciate, to engage, to understand the natural world with technology has always been there. And I think it always will be there. Let me very briefly now ponder where we're going to be going down the road. This is a cover of Time magazine from 4 or 5 years ago about the momentous year 2045 when the singularity will be achieved. So this is the futurist idea, taken semi-seriously by some semi-respectable people, that just given current trends in computing, that by the year 2045, we will finally all be in the cloud together. We will have cast aside our corporeal bodies. We will just be one incorporeal thought in the cloud, wherever the cloud will be in the year 2045. We'll just be a single super consciousness with no use for these mortal coils that we currently inhabit. And actually, the date for the future, for the singularity has been put up now to 2036, so it's right around the corner, actually. Now, wait a minute. Really? I have no idea. I don't know. I kind of doubt it. I mean, who can really look into a crystal ball and anticipate the future? But the idea of this singularity, you know, we don't have our bodies anymore. We're just a big computer in the sky. We're just a single consciousness, all 9 or 10 billion or however many of us there are at that time. Even if that doesn't happen at all, I think something as dramatic and as exciting as that is going to happen. I don't know what it's going to be, but when we consider the changes from 1990 to when I had that conversation with my grandmother to 2015, talking to our telephones and taking pictures with our phones and having computers that can answer any question on Earth, being just a few years away from computer consciousness, from computer sentience. That's all happened in 25 years, and really fast in the past 10 to 15 years. I anticipate changes just as momentous and just as shocking. I don't know if this is going to be the particular change, but it's going to happen. So is that bad? Is it bad if we become immortal and become a super consciousness in the sky? My answer is no, not at all. I don't have any problem with that at all. Just because we're a collective super consciousness doesn't mean we still can't appreciate birds and nature. And that's why I love being in audiences with people like you. I actually know some of you, but last week I was in South Dakota with people I didn't know at all, giving a very, very different talk. And I reflected on how I had nothing in common with those people. I mean, they were so different from me. They may as well have been, this thing with the thing sticking out of his head or her head. I'm not sure what the gender or genders of this individual is here. They were so different from me, and yet we were so united in our passion for birds. Even though I'd met them just 5 minutes earlier, we could have been friends for forever. It felt like I had known them forever, and I think I'll remember them forever. And that's what's so cool about birds and nature study. It doesn't matter what gender or genders you are, or whether you're any gender at all. It doesn't matter what color you are, or what language you speak. I don't think it matters whether you're what we today consider to be a human, or what we're increasingly coming to think of as a post-human entity. Those things don't matter. Male, female, or otherwise, black, white, or otherwise, human, computer, or otherwise, we can all engage, we can all understand, we can all appreciate nature together, and I think that is marvelous. That's 2045 or 2038 or 2036 or whenever it's supposed to happen. But I want to actually wrap up now by reflecting on what happened today. This is a curve-billed thrasher. It was the very first bird that Ken and I saw this morning as we rolled into Lake Pueblo Reservoir. Anyhow, Pueblo Reservoir. Some of you all know that it's sort of a perverse point of pride of mine that in all my years in Colorado, I've never birded Pueblo County. That changed this morning. I'm going to be coming back to Pueblo County. Some people are telling me I may be in Pueblo County tomorrow morning. It was just so cool. It was horrible weather on the way down. The sun came out, and the first bird we saw was this curve-billed thrasher singing his head off. Just listen for a moment here. This is the song of this particular curve-billed thrasher. So this is a way of engaging birds that I personally could not have conceived of 5 or 10 years ago. A beautiful rendering of our bird here, the song of the bird. And by the way, to get sort of technical about it, we can tell how old this bird is. Does anybody know the age of this bird? It's got really worn rectrices, and it doesn't show any molt limits in the wing coverage. So that makes this an after second year male curve-billed thrasher. Now, I know it was a male because it was singing out there, but to age this thrasher, the sort of thing I would not have even thought about doing until I started taking pictures and making video of birds out there. And that's just really, really neat to me. Now, I had this, this really bad idea about 3 hours ago. I actually changed this last slide. I was just going to say, see you tomorrow. This is the way the image was. This was going to be the end of my talk. I know you're about ready to head for the doors right now. I was just going to say, see you tomorrow, because I know we're going to go birding. But I was thinking about this whole idea of our all being together in this thing, whether we're computers or humans or whether we speak the same language or not. And the really cool thing about birding is, yeah, we're going to get together. I know some of you are going to be in the field with me tomorrow, and if I don't see you tomorrow, I'll see you the next day or something. But regardless of what the future holds in store, we're going to be at this birding and nature study thing forever. And that is just what is so cool to me about birding and nature study. I don't know where the future is going. I have a feeling that the change is going to be tumultuous. It's just going to be an upheaval in the decades to come, that when we look back at who we are, 2035, 2045, whenever, we're not going to even recognize ourselves in the antiquated and benighted, teens in the early 21st century, but we'll still be doing that birding and nature thing together, and I think that is so cool and so wonderful. On that note, I'll thank you for your attention and say good night.